In this last part 3, we will explore the relationship between mining and occupational health, always having in mind that what we are exploring at the end in this session is the relationship between mining, development, environment, and health. The occupational health impacts of mining have been long researched. In here, for instance, we have a table of the major health hazards in mines. This table was elaborated by Cho and Lee in 1978. They divided the agents according to physical and chemical and biological, which is something that has been done and it is still done, even though now we include as well the human resources aspects of the risks. Amongst the physical agents, they point at some of the hazards, such as frostbite, respiratory diseases, occupational deafness related to noise and the vibration related to the rock drilling. What we can see in this table as well, in a different way that I was organizing it before, the different phases of the mining process, together with the particular hazards and the health consequences. Our knowledge on the occupational health risks associated with particular mining process is still the same. The state of the knowledge hasn't changed much. For instance, this table that's adapted from Donoghue in 2000 shows a list of risks associated with the disease. For instance, electricity can cause the fatal electric shock. Radon and crystalline silica are associated with lung cancer. More and more we are disassociating the particular processes of the mining cycle, but we are more and more focusing on what particular risks arise from any of the processes and how we manage them. Apart from looking at the particular risk factors and the health consequences for workers, in order to manage the occupational health of workers, we need to know as well about the burden of the occupational injuries or diseases. In this slide, for instance, I'm showing Workus research amongst African miners. Using national records, work estimated the prevalence proportions of occupational diseases commonly experienced by South African mine workers for the years between 2000 and 2003. What Worku found is that cardiorespiratory tuberculosis was the most prevalent occupational disease at 40%. The second most prevalent occupational disease was noise-induced hearing loss, which, as we saw in the previous slide, is related to drilling and the noise inside confined spaces. The prevalence of pneumoconiosis was 15.37%, and the prevalence of silicosis related to the silica and the dust when drilling was 14%. The prevalence of other chronic obstructive airways disease or lung diseases was 2%. Worku also found out that over the 4-year period in between 2000 and 2003, 64 out of 37,000 miners died, which is not a large number compared to other mining industries. But then what we need to look in here is that those statistics start telling us about the burden of occupational health. Those statistics only took into account diseases and not accidents, which is actually the most common cause of ill health problems. Also, this research was based on state-run records. Therefore, the numbers, when we consider the burden of occupational diseases among South African miners, as the title of his article suggests, we can assume the numbers will be much higher because those are only accounting for the recorded cases by the state. Cooperatives, for instance, informal miners, self-employers, and private sector mining will have different records. Just as a contrast, my own research in Bolivia, as we can see in this pie in here, shows that in 2009, just in the Cerro Lecon Potosí, most of the work-related deaths were due to gas poisoning, which is due to high concentrations of gases within confined spaces that lack ventilation, and as well because while drilling, there are pockets of gas inside the rocks that will be released as the miners were drilling. The second largest cause of work-related deaths in the Cerro was head injuries. Miners did use helmets, which is recommended by the international guidelines in occupational health and safety. Is not enough when you do not have enough technology and infrastructures to make safe workplaces. So just to compare as well, Workus research measure the burden of occupational diseases using only state-run records, and that was a large-scale mining. For my own research amongst cooperative miners, the state does not keep records, cooperatives do not have records, so those statistics are based on police records, who are in charge, when possible, of removing the dead bodies from the mine. In addition to looking at the police records, another way of overcoming the lack of measurement of data and the lack of knowledge regarding the burden of occupational diseases is to look at the local newspapers. For instance, this newspaper from the 29th of January 2011 reports that 2 miners died due to an explosion of dynamite. It's interesting to see as well that at the top part of the front page of this newspaper we have the current mineral prices. This combination reflects what the miners were telling me, that we actually live and die for the mine, and the line between living and dying in the mine is blurry, it's not always clear. If we go at the global level, if we measure the global burden of occupational health, we will see there is clear lack of information regarding what is the global burden of mining-related health and safety accidents and diseases. But if we look anyway at the global burden of health and safety, the estimations are that 2.2 million work-related deaths happen globally. From 184 to 208 million workers suffer yearly from work-related diseases. According to the same report from the ILO, 4 to 5% of the world's GDP is lost due to accidents and diseases at work. However, again, as this graph from Gifrida illustrates, this is based on actually recorded and reported accidents and diseases, which is not always the case. We need as well to think that there is global inequalities in health and safety. From those 2.2 million work-related deaths globally and annually, 77% are estimated to happen within developing countries. It's important as well to notice, going back to this need for making distinctions amongst types of mining, it's important to understand as well that generally the smaller the industry is, the higher the rate of workplace injuries and illnesses. But that has not actually been recorded. So what are we doing to prevent those high rates of occupational accidents and diseases? International organizations such as the World Health Organization and the ILO and a large body of researchers have placed the workplace as the locus of learning, since occupational health risks arise from the processes associated to the workplace, as we discussed earlier. We have to manage them within the workplace. This figure, for instance, from the ILO, shows the different stages of occupational health management and planning. We go from identifying the hazards, deciding who might be harmed and how, and the likelihood, evaluating the risks, and decide which preventive measures we should put in place, record the findings, and review the whole process. That becomes the occupational health and safety management system illustrated in this slide. Best practices from countries are included into the International Labour Organization and World Health Organization guidelines for the development of national frameworks. The problem as well, in line with the discussion we had about environmental health and mining before, is that often compliance is only in paper. Again, those frameworks for health and safety management do not take into account the different types of mining. The different challenges and opportunities that we have already discussed have in terms of technological assets, economic assets, and so on, and the different type of workers. They do not take into account whether the differential bargaining power of different workers and their real entitlements and the pressures that either state or workers are having and how those influence their risk management choices. They do not take into account whether in this context we have other livelihood opportunities. And they don't take into account those issues that we discussed before in terms of the employment creation versus occupational health. And since they don't take it into account, no proper solutions can be placed. Similarly, since dominant approaches tend to focus on the workplace as the locus of learning, where health risks are constructed and should be managed, they overlook important determinants of health and safety, such as the role of value chains and international competitions for production and sale of mining. Various books reflect those dynamics around mining and development. For instance, we have Domitila Chingara's Let Me Speak, June Nash's famous We Eat the Mines and the Mines Eat Us, Dependency and Exploitation in Bolivian Tin Mines. All of them good readings to further explore the relationship between those working conditions and how fluctuations in mineral prices and local dynamics determine how those workplaces are formed and developed over time, and with what effects for people's health and well-being. To sum up, what are the implications of those case studies and of those different parts of this session? First implication is that we need more data. We need more information and we need to split it and separate it. It's not going to work if we just make generalizations saying whether mining is good for development or bad for development. We need to take into account heterogeneities, the two sides of the same coin, and what do those differences mean. There is the need for flexible and collaborative working. We have seen that occupational risks and environmental risks need to be managed through various disciplines working together, and as well through various institutions and global actors and local actors working together. That requires multi, inter and transdisciplinary solutions. Not one single discipline will not bring solutions. And that requires as well approaching the relationship between mining and development, environment and occupational health, and understanding the multiple level implications and solutions, focusing at the micro, meso and macro level simultaneously. We have discussed as well that codes of conduct will not bring change, so we need to explore different options. We have discussed the importance of understanding that contexts are heterogeneous. Therefore, we need to question this assumption upon which solutions are based, that one size fits all. And that applies as well for context, and it applies in the terms of businesses. We have seen that there's different types of mining with different challenges and opportunities for development, and this focus and this dominant approach based on the one-size-fits-all solution may not actually work. And we need to critically approach issues of regulation and compare them with compliance, not as a strategy to enforce compliance, but that is a strategy to learn about the mistakes and as a strategy to actually pose solutions to the problems that lead to non-compliance.